can't believe you emptied our joint account to buy her that Audi, I said, watching my husband hand the keys to his girlfriend at our anniversary dinner. What does it matter? My trust fund will cover anything we need, Jack smirked. I sipped my champagne, hiding a smile. He'd forgotten that as trustee, I'd been the one managing his family's money for the past decade. The white leather interior of the car gleamed under the restaurant's outdoor lights, almost as blinding as the rage bubbling beneath my composed exterior. The irony wasn't lost on me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack had invited his girlfriend Kendra to our 15-year anniversary dinner, not even attempting to hide their relationship anymore. Her manicured fingers curled around the key fob as she stood beside him, her triumphant smile directed at me. The joint account was just sitting there, Jack continued, watching for my reaction. Besides, the paperwork for my next trust distribution is already filed. We'll be fine. Or rather, I will. He emphasized the last words, making his intentions crystal clear. I raised my glass in a mock toast, the crystal catching the light. A wedding gift from Jack's grandmother who, with unusual foresight, had insisted I be named co-trustee when we married. To new beginnings, I offered. Kendra glanced at me with practiced sympathy. Don't worry about money, Ava. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Somewhere modest. Her voice dripped with false concern. When your husband of 15 years spends your retirement savings on his girlfriend, there's nothing modest about the response, I replied evenly, maintaining eye contact with Jack. He looked away first. I'd spent the past 3 months building my case and gathering evidence. Jack had grown increasingly reckless. Weekends away at luxury hotels, expensive gifts appearing on our credit card statements, large withdrawals from our joint accounts. He thought his family's generational wealth made him untouchable. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was forgetting exactly who his grandmother had appointed to manage that wealth in the first place. Jack's grandfather had built a shipping empire from nothing, but his father had nearly bankrupted the family through poor investments and lavish spending. His grandmother, determined to preserve what remained of their fortune, had established a complex trust with strict conditions. Jack received quarterly distributions that would increase substantially on his 50th birthday, less than 6 months away. What he'd conveniently forgotten was that after his father's financial disasters, his grandmother had insisted that any spouse of Jack's would serve as co-trustee, implementing a system of checks and balances. When we married, she'd taken me aside and explained why. Men in this family have a history of poor judgment when it comes to money and women. I'm breaking that cycle. I'd spent the early years of our marriage earning a financial management degree, then an MBA, while growing close to his grandmother. When she passed away 5 years ago, she'd amended the trust one final time, giving me full trustee authority with a single devastating clause. In cases of documented infidelity, the cheating spouse's distributions could be suspended for up to 5 years. Jack had been faithful then, or at least discreet. The amendment seemed like an unnecessary safeguard from a woman overly concerned with family legacy and reputation. Until now. I looked across the table at the man I had once loved, with my whole heart, trying to reconcile him with the stranger before me. Jack had always been charismatic and confident, born into privilege but seemingly grounded. We'd met when I was working in the accounting department of his family's foundation. He'd appeared in my doorway one afternoon with a spreadsheet question. That could have been handled by email. 3 hours of conversation later, he asked me to dinner. "You're different," he'd said during that first date. "You see beyond the family name." I hadn't planned to fall for him. At 30, I'd built a modest but satisfying life for myself after growing up in near poverty. But Jack was persistent, charming, and his attentiveness felt like being bathed in sunlight after years in shadow. Our whirlwind romance culminated in a proposal just 6 months later. We'll be partners in everything, he promised, slipping his grandmother's ring onto my finger. Equal in all things. The wedding was elegant, but intimate, held on his family's estate. My small circle of friends seemed dwarfed by his extensive social connections, but his grandmother had taken me under her wing, standing firm against his mother's attempts to turn our wedding into a society spectacle. "This one has backbone," she'd told Jack's mother within my hearing. "She'll keep him honest." I'd tried. For 15 years I'd tried. But the changes in Jack had been so subtle that looking back, I could only now see the pattern. First came the separate credit card I wasn't permitted to see. Then the guys' weekends that corresponded, with missing funds. The late nights at the office that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. The gradual freezing out of my friends and family, until my world had narrowed to Jack and his social circle. I maintained my position handling the family's philanthropic work and serving as trustee, but even there, he'd begun to question my decisions, suggesting his college friend Edward might be better suited to manage the investments. What Jack didn't know was that Edward had already approached me, concerned about Jack's recent behavior and increasingly erratic financial decisions. He tried to authorize a $500,000 investment in some crypto scheme last month, Edward had confided. I stalled him, but he was insistent, said he needed to liquidate assets quickly for reasons he wouldn't specify. 3 months ago, I'd found a receipt in Jack's jacket pocket for a diamond bracelet I'd never received. That same week, our household account was suddenly short the exact amount needed for property taxes on our vacation home. When questioned, Jack claimed the bank must have made an error. The bank hadn't made an error. Jack had made the critical mistake of underestimating me. As I sat at that anniversary dinner, watching my husband fawn over his girlfriend while she dangled her new car keys, I felt something inside me harden into resolve. The modest settlement he'd mentioned earlier that day, which I'd pretended to accept tearfully, would never materialize. By tomorrow morning, his access to the trust distributions would be frozen, his credit cards canceled, and his girlfriend's new car would be the last extravagant gift he could give anyone for a very long time. I raised my glass again, this time with genuine pleasure. "To the future, Jack. May you get exactly what you deserve." After dinner, I insisted on driving myself home despite Jack's half-hearted offer to drop me off. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said, the double meaning clear to me, if not to him. He shrugged, already turning his attention back to Kendra, who was running her hands over the Audi's sleek dashboard with undisguised glee. As I drove through the quiet streets of our exclusive neighborhood, memories flooded back unbidden. I thought of the day Jack's grandmother had called me into her study, just 3 months after our wedding. Eleanor Blackwood had been formidable even in her 80s. Steel gray hair always perfectly coiffed, posture ramrod straight, eyes that missed. "Nothing. Sit down, Ava," she'd said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her massive oak desk. "We need to discuss Jack's inheritance." I'd been uncomfortable, feeling like an interloper in matters of family wealth. "Shouldn't Jack be here for this conversation?" Eleanor had smiled, the expression warming her otherwise severe face. "Jack understands stocks and bonds about as well as I understand those ridiculous reality shows. No, this conversation is for you." She'd explained the Blackwood family trust in detail, the quarterly distributions, the investment limitations, the conditions that had been placed after Jack's father had nearly bankrupted them. Richard was brilliant in many ways, but impulsive. Jack inherited that trait. Then she'd slid a document across the desk. "I'm naming you co-trustee, with full signatory authority." My shock must have been evident. Eleanor's laugh had been dry but not unkind. "Don't look so surprised. I've seen your background check. First in your class at State, working since you were 16, debt-free through scholarships and hard work. You understand the value of money because you've had to earn every dollar. But why me? Why not your financial advisors or lawyers?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because you love my grandson for who he is, not what he has, she'd replied simply. And because when Jack inevitably tries to make some questionable financial decision, I need someone with both the backbone to say no and the paperwork to enforce it. I hadn't fully understood the gift she was giving me then. How could I? Our marriage was new, passionate, seemingly unbreakable. The possibility that I might someday need protection from Jack had seemed absurd. Now, pulling into our circular driveway, I felt profound gratitude for Eleanor's foresight. The house loomed before me, a modernist structure of glass and steel that had always seemed more like a showpiece than a home. Jack had insisted on buying it 5 years ago, claiming we'd outgrown the charming craftsman where we'd spent our first decade together. In reality, he'd wanted something more impressive to entertain his increasingly wealthy circle of friends. Inside, I moved through the cavernous rooms with purpose, heading straight for my home office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a red leather-bound folder, Eleanor's folder, as I still thought of it. Inside were the trust, documents, including the amendment she'd added before her death. I ran my finger over the crucial paragraph. In the event of documented infidelity by any beneficiary, all trust distributions may be suspended for a period not to exceed 5 years, at the sole discretion of the trustee. At the time, I'd questioned the clause. That seems rather personal for a financial document, I'd told Eleanor. The Blackwood men have a particular weakness, she'd replied, her mouth set in a grim line. My husband, my son, and I fear, eventually, my grandson. This clause isn't about punishment, Ava. It's about preventing the family fortune from being squandered on mistresses and divorce settlements. I tucked the folder into my briefcase and then moved to our bedroom. Jack wouldn't be home tonight. He'd made that clear at dinner, not even bothering to fabricate an excuse. I packed a small overnight bag with essentials, then logged onto our home computer. For the past 3 months, I'd been meticulously documenting everything. Credit card statements showing hotel charges in the city on nights Jack claimed to be working late, receipts for jewelry and clothing in sizes that weren't mine, text messages I'd screenshot from his phone while he slept. Most damning of all was the secondary apartment he'd leased for Kendra 6 months ago, paid for from our joint account but listed under his business expenses. I transferred all the evidence to a secure cloud account I'd created, then sent a brief email to Allison Barrett, the family attorney who had served the Blackwoods since before Jack was born. Need to meet first thing tomorrow regarding trust distribution suspension. We'll bring documentation. Allison's response came within minutes, despite the late hour. 9 a.m., bring everything. I smiled at her efficiency. Allison had never particularly warmed to Jack, though she'd maintained perfect professionalism throughout the years. I suspected she'd seen this scenario play out before, perhaps with Jack's father. As I prepared for bed in the guest room, I couldn't face our marital bed knowing what I knew. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Don't wait up. Staying at the club tonight. The country club didn't offer accommodations. Another casual lie, not even crafted with care. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I sent a message to Camille, my former college roommate, and now a forensic accountant I'd reconnected with recently. Everything in place for tomorrow? All set, came her reply. Account freeze will take effect at 9:30 a.m. Credit cards at 10. He won't know what hit him. I slept soundly that night for the first time in months, no longer burdened by uncertainty or the weight of maintaining appearances. In the morning, I dressed with particular care. A sharp charcoal suit that Eleanor had gifted me for my first board meeting as trustee. Pearl earrings that had been in my family for generations. A subtle application of makeup that highlighted my features without appearing overdone. Jack had always told me I looked better natural, which I eventually realized meant unnoticed. fading into the background while he commanded attention. Today, I wanted to be seen. As I prepared to leave, I paused in our home gallery where photographs chronicled our life together. Near the end was an image from Eleanor's funeral, Jack and I standing beside her casket, his arm around my shoulders in a gesture of comfort that seemed hollow now. I remembered what Eleanor had whispered to me during our last private conversation, mere days before her death. The trust protects the deserving and punishes the reckless. Remember that when the time comes. The time had come. Allison Barrett's law office occupied the entire top floor of a historic building downtown. Unlike the sleek, modern skyscrapers surrounding it, this structure maintained its original limestone facade and ornate cornices, a testament to permanence in a city obsessed with the new and shiny. Much like the Blackwood family itself, I thought as I rode the elevator upward. The reception area was understated but unmistakably expensive. Oriental rugs in muted colors, original oil paintings on the walls, furniture that had been handcrafted rather than mass-produced. Allison's assistant, a young woman with impeccable posture and a sharp gaze, greeted me by name. "Mrs. Blackwood, Ms. Barrett is expecting you." Even after 15 years, the name still sometimes caught me by surprise. In professional settings, I'd maintained my maiden name, Montgomery, partly out of independence and partly because Jack had never pushed the issue. Blackwood was reserved for social functions and family matters. Today, however, I was very much here as a Blackwood. Allison rose from behind her desk as I entered, extending her hand. At 62, she remained as formidable as when I'd first met her at our wedding. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, her navy suit perfectly tailored, her handshake firm. "Ava," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I've been expecting this meeting for some time." That surprised me. "You have?" She removed her reading glasses, letting them hang from a chain around her neck. "Jack has been making inquiries about modifying the trust, specifically about removing you as trustee." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "On what grounds?" "Claimed you were becoming too conservative with investments. Said you were stifling growth opportunities." Her mouth curved in a slight smile. "Of course, I informed him that the trustee designation is irrevocable unless there's evidence of gross negligence or criminal mismanagement." "When was this?" "The first inquiry was approximately 6 months ago. The most recent was last week." She folded her hands on the desk. "I assume his timing correlates with what brings you here today." I nodded, opening my briefcase. "Jack has been having an affair, using our joint savings to fund it, and unless I'm mistaken, he's planning to file for divorce after his birthday distribution comes through." If Allison was surprised, she didn't show it. Instead, she leaned forward. "What evidence do you have?" For the next 45 minutes, I methodically presented my documentation. Hotel receipts, gift purchases, the apartment lease, bank transfers, with suspicious timing. Photographs of Jack and Kendra entering hotels together, screenshots of intimate text messages, even a video a friend had sent me of them together at a restaurant on the other side of town, clearly more than colleagues. Allison reviewed everything with clinical precision, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she removed her glasses again, meeting my gaze directly. "The infidelity clause is clear, and your evidence is substantial. We can proceed with the distribution suspension immediately." She paused. "You should know that Jack has already submitted paperwork for his 50th birthday distribution. It's substantial, nearly $8 million. "I'm aware," I said. "Eleanor showed me the full trust distribution schedule before she died." "And you're prepared for his reaction when he discovers his access has been frozen?" I hesitated, then nodded. "He'll be angry, probably threatening, but I don't believe he'd become physically violent." "Nevertheless," Allison said, reaching into her desk drawer, "I've taken the liberty of arranging for additional security at your home and office for the next few weeks." She slid a business card across the desk. "Roy Mercer, former military, now runs the most discreet personal security firm in the city. He's already been briefed on the situation. I stared at her. You really have been expecting this. Allison's expression softened slightly. Eleanor was my friend for over 40 years. She chose you as trustee for a reason, and she confided her concerns about Jack to me many times. The amendment wasn't added on a whim. She straightened some papers on her desk. Now, shall we proceed with the paperwork? By 10:30 that morning, the necessary documents were signed and filed. Jack's quarterly distribution, due to be deposited the following week, was officially suspended. His access to the trust's investment accounts was frozen. The family attorney had initiated the formal notification process, which would reach Jack by the end of the day. As I prepared to leave, Allison handed me a sealed envelope. Eleanor left this for you. She asked that I give it to you when the Xiao situation with Jack becomes untenable. I believe we've reached that point. The envelope was heavy cream-colored stationery with my name written in Eleanor's elegant script. I slipped it into my bag, oddly reluctant to open it in Allison's presence. One more thing, Allison said. The main estate, the original Blackwood property, Eleanor left it in the family trust, but with a specific provision that you have lifetime residency rights, regardless of your marital status with Jack. This was news to me. Jack always said the estate would come to him outright on his 50th birthday. Allison shook her head. That was never the case. The estate remains in trust, with you as primary trustee for the duration of your lifetime. After that, it passes to any children you might have had. Only if there are no descendants does it revert to Jack's control. I absorbed this information slowly. The Blackwood estate, a magnificent colonial property on 20 acres of land at the edge of the city, had been the backdrop for family events throughout our marriage. Jack had often spoken of his plans to sell it after his birthday, claiming it was too much maintenance and a relic of the past. He doesn't know, does he? I asked. That particular provision was in a codicil Eleanor added shortly before her death. It was never explicitly discussed with Jack. Allison's expression remained neutral, but I detected a hint of satisfaction. Eleanor was rather private about her final arrangements. As I drove to my next appointment, I couldn't help but smile at Eleanor's foresight. She had systematically created a safety net I hadn't known I would need, placing barriers between Jack and the wealth he took for granted. The woman had been 3 steps ahead of everyone, including her own grandson. My phone rang, the Bluetooth connecting the call to my car's speakers. It was Camille. Phase 1, complete, she reported. Credit cards deactivated, account freeze in Thai. Place. His assistant just tried to process a charge for some client lunch, and it was declined. Any reaction yet? I asked, turning onto the highway. Nothing direct, but his assistant called accounting in a panic. Apparently, he has a reservation. Tonight at Meridian, you know that new restaurant where you have to book months in advance? Table for 2. Meridian was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, with a 6-month waiting list and a price tag to match. Jack had claimed we couldn't get reservations when I'd mentioned wanting to try it for our anniversary. Let me guess, I said. Not a business dinner. Unless his business associate is named Kendra and requires champagne and roses pre-ordered, Camille replied dryly. I smiled despite myself. Keep me posted on developments. I'm heading to meet with Edward now. The investment advisor? Good. Lock down those accounts. And Ava. Camille paused. Be prepared. Men like Jack don't take humiliation well. I know, I said quietly, thinking of Eleanor's envelope in my bag and the security measures Allison had already put in place. I know exactly what kind of man Jack is. Edward Williams's office was located in the financial district, a stark contrast to Allison's historic building. Everything here was glass and steel, reflecting the afternoon sun with almost aggressive brilliance. Modern, clean, efficient, precisely what you'd want in someone handling millions in family assets. Edward had been managing the Blackwood investments for nearly a decade. Eleanor had hired him shortly after his 35th birthday, impressed by his conservative approach and ethical investment philosophy. Jack had initially resisted, preferring his college friend Jasper, whose flashier investment style had produced short-term gains but long-term instability. Eleanor had been immovable on the subject. "I've seen what happens when money managers prioritize commissions over client welfare," she'd told me privately. "Edward may not promise the moon, but he'll ensure we keep the earth beneath our feet." Now, as I was escorted into his corner office, Edward rose to greet me with a warm handshake. At 45, he had the trim build of someone who ran marathons, he did, and the focused gaze of someone who read financial reports for pleasure, he did that too. "Ava, good to see you, though I suspect this isn't a routine meeting." "No, I confirmed, taking a seat across from him. "I've initiated the infidelity clause in Jack's trust. His distributions are suspended, effective immediately." Edward didn't react beyond a slight raising of his eyebrows. He reached for a leather portfolio on his desk, opening it to a blank page. "I assume you have the signed authorization from Allison?" I passed him the documents. He reviewed them carefully, making occasional notes. Finally, he looked up. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll implement the access restrictions immediately." He paused, tapping his pen against the portfolio. "Jack called this morning. He wanted to discuss liquidating some assets." "Let me guess. Approximately $8 million worth?" Edward nodded. "He mentioned property investments that couldn't wait for the birthday distribution. Said he needed to move quickly before the opportunity disappeared." "And what did you tell him?" "That any significant liquidation would require trustee approval, your approval, and that I'd need to see the investment prospectus before proceeding." Edward's mouth quirked in a half-smile. He wasn't pleased with that answer. I could imagine. Jack had grown increasingly irritated with Edward's insistence on due diligence over the years. "Has he been making unusual requests lately? Beyond today?" Edward hesitated, then opened a drawer and removed a file. "Over the past 6 months, Jack has made several attempts to access trust capital outside the normal distribution schedule. First, it was a cryptocurrency investment opportunity, highly speculative, with minimal documentation. Then, an exclusive real estate development in Dubai with promise of guaranteed returns." He slid the file toward me. "Each time, I explained that these transactions would require your signature as co-trustee. Each time, he assured me he would handle it with you." Edward gave me a level look. "I assume he never mentioned any of this." "Not a word," I confirmed, skimming the documents. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars for investments that even my limited financial knowledge recognized as questionable at best, fraudulent at worst. "There's more," Edward said quietly. 2 weeks ago, he brought me paperwork for a business expansion requiring immediate capital. When I reviewed the documents, I discovered it was actually for the purchase of a luxury condominium in the Archer building downtown. I looked up sharply. "The new development with the rooftop pool and private elevator access?" Edward nodded. "The purchase agreement was in the name of Kendra Mills." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Jack had been planning to buy his girlfriend a multi-million-dollar apartment using trust funds, money that was meant to secure our family's future. I thought of our modest first home that he'd insisted we couldn't afford to keep, of the vacations he'd canceled claiming budget concerns, of the children we'd delayed having because the timing wasn't right financially. "Does Jack have any idea?" "How much you know?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "No. I simply told him the transaction couldn't proceed without proper documentation and your signature." Edward leaned forward. "Ava, there's something else you should know. The trust's primary bank account, the one that holds the liquid assets for distributions, Jack attempted to add himself as sole signatory last month." My blood ran cold. "Can he do that?" "No. Not without your signature and Allison's approval." But the attempt itself is concerning. Edward closed his portfolio deliberately. Based on these patterns, I believe Jack may be experiencing financial difficulties beyond what's apparent. The urgency of his request has been increasing. I thought about the drained joint account, the expensive gifts for Kendra, the apartment. He'd already been leasing for her. You think he's overextended himself? It's a possibility. Men in Jack's position sometimes develop a sense of financial invulnerability. They make commitments based on money they don't yet have, but believe they're entitled to. Edward's expression was carefully neutral. The birthday distribution may be covering more than just future plans. The implications settled over me slowly. If Jack had been making promises based on the birthday distribution, promises to Kendra, to creditors, to investment partners, then freezing his access was more than an inconvenience. It was potentially catastrophic to whatever he'd been planning. I should warn you, Edward continued, that when Jack discovers the distribution has been suspended, his reaction may be extreme, especially if he's under financial pressure. Allison's already arranged security, I said. And I've taken precautions with our personal accounts. Edward nodded approvingly. Smart. But consider this a professional recommendation. Document everything from this point forward. Every call, every text, every interaction. Men facing financial ruin can become unpredictable. As I drove away from Edward's office, my phone began ringing incessantly. Jack's name flashed on the screen 6 times in succession. I let each call go to voicemail. Then came the text messages, their tone evolving from confusion to anger to outright threats. Why are my cards being declined? Call me immediately. What the hell have you done, Ava? You have no right to freeze my accounts. If you think you can control my money, you're making a massive mistake. You'll regret this. I promise you'll regret this. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, needing a moment to collect myself. My hands shook slightly as I silenced my phone. This was the moment everything changed, the point of no return. Jack now knew something was happening, though he likely didn't yet understand the full extent. I thought about the woman I'd been when I married Jack, hopeful, trusting, perhaps naively believing in the partnership he'd promised. I'd grown up with so little, the child of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us above the poverty line. Education had been my escape, hard work my religion. When Jack had entered my life with his easy charm and limitless resources, it had seemed like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as I'd learned, often had darker origins than their modern retellings. Behind every prince was a history, and behind every kingdom was power that could corrupt. I opened Eleanor's envelope, her final message to me. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small key. My dear Ava, it began. If you're reading this, then Jack has finally shown his true nature. I read Eleanor's letter carefully, absorbing each precisely written word. Her elegant script flowed across the heavy stationery, revealing secrets that made my chest tighten with each paragraph. My dear Ava, if you're reading this, then Jack has finally shown his true nature, and you've been wise enough to use the protections I put in place. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but the Blackwood men have followed this pattern for generations. Charm giving way to entitlement, partnership dissolving into control. Jack's father, Richard, nearly destroyed everything my husband and I built through similar behavior. Affairs, risky investments, promises made to mistresses using family money. I watched my son repeat his father's mistakes despite every advantage and opportunity. When Jack began showing the same tendencies, I knew I needed to intervene differently than I had with Richard. You were never just a wife to me, Ava. You were the solution. From our first meeting, I recognized in you what the Blackwood fortune truly needed. Someone who understood the value of money because you earned it. Someone who saw wealth as responsibility rather than entitlement. The trust amendments giving you control were just the beginning. The key enclosed opens a safe deposit box at First Meridian Bank, box number 2734. Inside, you'll find documentation of a separate trust I established 5 years ago with you as sole beneficiary and trustee. I've been quietly transferring assets into this trust, ensuring they remain protected regardless of what happens with Jack. This isn't just about money, it's about legacy and purpose. The Blackwood fortune was built by my husband through shipping innovations that employed thousands. His vision was never about luxury, but about creating something meaningful. Jack has lost sight of that purpose, but I believe you haven't. Use what I've left you wisely, and remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in impact. With affection and confidence, Eleanor Blackwood. The small key felt suddenly heavier in my palm. Eleanor hadn't just given me defensive measures against Jack's behavior, she'd created an entirely separate financial foundation for me. I wasn't just protected, I was empowered. My phone vibrated again, Jack's 20th call in the past hour. This time, I answered. "Where the hell are you?" His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "And what have you done to my accounts?" "Hello, Jack," I said calmly. "I assume you've been notified about the trust distribution suspension." A sharp intake of breath. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "Actually, I can. The infidelity clause in the trust is quite clear. All distributions may be suspended for up to 5 years at the trustee's discretion. That's me, Jack. I'm the trustee. This is about Kendra. Not a question, not even a denial. So, I had an affair. Lots of men do. It doesn't justify financial sabotage. It's not just the affair," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "It's the apartment you leased for her using our joint savings. It's the condo you tried to buy her with trust funds. It's the 15 years of partnership you discarded while systematically draining our accounts." Silence stretched between us, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted from anger to calculation. "Let's discuss this rationally. We can come to an arrangement that benefits us both. The birthday distribution is substantial enough to split fairly." "There won't be a birthday distribution, Jack. Not for 5 years, not unless I choose to reinstate it." Another silence, this one heavier. "You're bluffing. Call Allison if you don't believe me. The paperwork is already filed. Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice had dropped dangerously low. "I've made commitments based on that distribution. Financial commitments." Edward had been right. "What kind of commitments?" "That's none of your concern. It is if you used family assets as collateral." A sudden thought struck me. "Jack, did you borrow against the trust?" His hesitation told me everything. It was a bridge loan, perfectly standard financial practice. The distribution would have covered it entirely. My mind raced through implications. How much? 3 million. A pause. Maybe closer to 4. I closed my eyes briefly. And the lender? Another pause. Does it matter? I'd like to know who my husband borrowed millions from without legal authorization. Jack's voice turned defensive. Jasper connected me with some investors. Very exclusive. Group. Excellent track record. Jasper Reynolds. Jack's college friend with the questionable investment strategies. The one Eleanor had refused to let manage the family money. Private lenders, then. Not a bank. They're legitimate businessmen who understand how these things work. Translation, they weren't legitimate at all. And what happens when you can't pay them back as promised? Jack's laugh held no humor. That's the situation you've created, isn't it? Why don't you tell me? I think you need to speak with Edward and Allison, immediately. Perhaps they can help structure a repayment plan from your existing assets. My existing assets are tied up in the trust that you've just frozen, he snapped. Everything else went into securing the loans and other expenses. Kendra, the car, the apartment, the lifestyle he'd been maintaining alongside our marriage. Jack. Save it. You've made your point. You've humiliated me. But this isn't over, Ava. The cold precision in his voice raised goosebumps on my arms. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The call ended abruptly. I sat in my parked car, hands trembling slightly as I processed the implications. Jack wasn't just angry about the distribution suspension. He was frightened. He'd borrowed millions from private lenders, probably at exorbitant interest rates, secured against a trust distribution he no longer had access to. My phone rang again. Camille this time. We need to meet, she said without preamble. I've been reviewing the financial records you shared, and there's something you need to see immediately. Can you come to my office? 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Camille in her downtown office. Unlike Allison's traditional space or Edward's modern one, Camille's office reflected her practical nature, functional, organized, with diplomas and certifications lining one wall and multiple computer screens displaying financial data on her desk. She pushed a folder toward me. These are transfers from your joint accounts over the past year. Notice anything? I scanned the documents, focusing on the highlighted transactions. Large withdrawals, almost weekly. But I knew he was spending money on Kendra. Look at the dates and amounts, Camille instructed, pointing to a pattern I hadn't noticed before. The first Tuesday of every month, $50,000 without fail. That's a lot, even for Jack. It's not just a lot, it's consistent, and it's not going to Kendra. Camille turned her screen toward me. I traced the transfers. They're going to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a shell, company called Blackwood Ventures. Jack doesn't own a company called Blackwood Ventures. No, he doesn't. Camille looked at me steadily. But Jasper Reynolds does. And from that account, the money moves again, to another entity called Meridian Holdings. My stomach tightened. And who owns that? On paper? No one you'd recognize. But I did some digging. She pulled up another document. Meridian Holdings has made regular payments to another account belonging to Marcus Delaney. The name struck a chord of recognition. The developer? The one building that luxury condo complex downtown? Camille nodded. The same one where Jack tried to buy an apartment for Kendra. But here's where it gets interesting. Delaney has been under federal investigation for suspected money laundering. Nothing proven yet, but there are rumors. The implications settled over me like a heavy shroud. You think Jack's involved in something illegal? I think Jack's been moving substantial sums through questionable channels to people under investigation. Whether he knew what he was participating in? She shrugged. That's a different question. I thought about Jack's urgent need for the birthday distribution, his panic when learning it had been suspended, his legitimate businessmen who had provided bridge loans. Jack said he borrowed against the trust, almost $4 million. Camille's eyes widened slightly. From banks? No, private lenders, connected through Jasper. She sat back, exhaling slowly. Ava, I think you need to be very careful. If Jack's involved with the people I suspect, they don't handle investment disappointments with polite letters and phone calls. I remembered Roy Mercer's business card in my purse, Allison's prescient arrangement of security measures. What should I do? First, secure yourself physically. Then we need to understand exactly what Jack's been involved in before making any decisions. Camille began typing rapidly. I have a contact at the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. No names yet, just hypotheticals to gauge how serious this might be. As I left Camille's office, clutching a folder of financial records and Eleanor's letter, I felt a strange combination of fear and determination. The situation had escalated beyond a simple case of infidelity and financial betrayal. Jack might be involved in something truly dangerous, something that not only threatened our marriage, but potentially our safety. I pulled out my phone and called the number on Roy Mercer's card. Whatever came next, I needed to be prepared. Roy Mercer agreed to meet me immediately at a small cafe 3 blocks from Camille's office. I spotted him instantly. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the hyper-vigilant posture of someone who had spent years anticipating threats. His close-cropped, salt-and-pepper hair, and the way his eyes continuously scanned the room spoke to a military background. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, standing as I approached his corner table. "Allison briefed me on your situation, but I suspect there have been developments." I slid into the chair opposite him, angling it to see both him and the door. "My husband may be involved with people more dangerous than I initially thought." Roy's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Tell me," I explained. What Camille had discovered: the regular payments to offshore accounts, the connections to Jasper Reynolds and Marcus Delaney, Jack's urgent need for the trust distribution to cover unauthorized loans. Roy listened without interruption, occasionally, making notes in a small black book. When I finished, he closed the notebook deliberately. "Based on what you've told me, your husband has likely been involved in a money laundering operation, whether knowingly or not." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Delaney's development projects have been on our radar for some time." "Your radar?" A slight smile. "Before private security, I was with Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I still maintain connections there." That explained Allison's confidence in him. "How dangerous is this situation?" "That depends on several factors. How much money is at stake, how sophisticated these operators are, and whether your husband is a knowing participant or merely a useful idiot." Roy's bluntness was oddly reassuring. "The immediate concern is your personal safety. You think Jack would physically threaten me? Not necessarily Jack himself, but the people he's borrowed from. They've extended millions based on collateral that no longer exists. They'll want compensation, one way or another." A chill ran through me. "What do you recommend?" "First, you need secure accommodations, not your primary residence, somewhere Jack and his associates wouldn't think to look. Second, we need to establish surveillance on Jack to understand who he's meeting with and what he's planning." "I can stay at the Blackwood estate," I said, thinking of Allison's revelation about my lifetime residency rights. "Jack rarely goes there anymore. Says it's too old-fashioned." Roy nodded. "Good. Rural, presumably with security systems already." "In place?" "Yes, and limited access points." "Even better. I'll assign 2 of my people there immediately, one visible, one not. As for monitoring Jack," he reached into his jacket and removed a small device. "This goes on your phone. It allows us to track your location and provides a direct panic button to my team. If Jack contacts you, try to meet in public places only and let us know in advance." As Roy continued outlining security protocols, my phone buzzed with a text from Allison. "Jack just left my office. Extremely agitated. Mentioned finding you immediately. Where are you?" I showed Roy the message. His response was immediate. "We leave now. My car is out back." 20 minutes later, we were driving toward the Blackwood estate on the outskirts of the city. Roy made several calls, arranging for his team to meet us there and setting up preliminary surveillance on Jack. "One of my people will retrieve essentials from your home once we're certain Jack isn't there," Roy explained as we turned onto the private road leading to the estate. "In the meantime, I suggest you contact anyone Jack might pressure for information about your whereabouts. Warn them not to disclose anything." The estate came into view, a stately Georgian mansion set back from the road, surrounded by ancient oak trees and formal gardens that Eleanor had meticulously maintained. It had been months since I'd visited, and seeing it now felt like returning to a different chapter of my life. As we pulled into the circular driveway, my phone rang. "Jack." I glanced at Roy, who nodded encouragingly. "Put it on speaker," he said. "Quietly," I answered, activating the speakerphone. "Hello, Jack." "Where are you?" His voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of panic I'd never heard before. "We need to talk. Now." "I'm not ready to talk yet." "This isn't a request, Ava. Do you have any idea what you've done? The people I'm dealing with, they don't care about marital disputes or your feelings. They want their money. The money you borrowed against trust assets without authorization," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That was your choice, Jack. Don't lecture me about choices." His voice dropped dangerously. "You've made a catastrophic mistake. These aren't people you can negotiate with or hide from." I caught Roy's eye, noting his microscopic nod of confirmation. Jack wasn't exaggerating the danger. "What do these people want, Jack?" A bitter laugh. "What do you think they want? They're $4 million plus interest by the end of the week." "Or what?" Silence stretched between us. Then, "Or they start looking for other forms of compensation. And trust me, Ava, you don't want to know what those forms might include." Roy gestured for me to continue pressing. "Who exactly are these people? Does Jasper know what he got you involved in?" "Jasper?" Another harsh laugh. "Jasper's been working for them for years. Why do you think Eleanor wouldn't let him anywhere near the family money?" That revelation stopped me cold. Eleanor knew about Jasper's connections? "Eleanor knew everything," Jack said bitterly. "Why do you think she set up all those trust provisions? The old witch was controlling everyone from beyond the grave." "Don't speak about her that way," I said automatically, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "She was trying to protect the family legacy." "The family legacy," Jack mimicked. "The precious Blackwood name. Well, that name is about to be dragged through something far worse than a simple divorce if you don't fix this, Ava." Roy was writing something on a notepad. "Ask who specific lenders are. I need names, Jack. Who did you borrow from?" "That's not a conversation for the eye." "Phone. Then where? When?" Another pause. "The Archer Building, penthouse. Tomorrow at noon. Jasper will be there too. Don't bring anyone. They'll have security checking." The call ended abruptly. Roy was already dialing a number on his own phone. "I need everything we have on the Archer. Building downtown, security layouts, entrance points, tenant lists, and run a full background on Jasper Reynolds, priority status." He glanced at me. "We're not sending you to that meeting, but we need to know what's happening there." As we entered the Blackwood estate, my mind was reeling with the implications of Jack's revelations. Jasper wasn't just a college friend with questionable investment strategies. He was actively involved with people dangerous enough to frighten Jack, people Eleanor had specifically worked to keep away from the family money. The cavernous foyer of the estate was just as I remembered. Marble floors, sweeping staircase, portraits of Blackwood ancestors lining the walls. But now, those stern faces seemed to be judging more than just my fashion choices or social graces. They were witnessing the near collapse of their dynasty through one man's greed and entitlement. Roy's team arrived within the hour, a woman named Kate who would serve as my visible security, and a man called Davis who would handle surveillance from less obvious positions. They moved through the house with practiced efficiency, checking entry points, sightlines, establishing communications. "The estate is actually quite secure," Kate noted as she finished her assessment. "Limited access points, clear sightlines from all windows, existing alarm system that's still functional. We'll supplement with our own equipment, but whoever designed this place had security in mind." "Eleanor renovated extensively after an attempted break-in 15 years ago," I explained, remembering how shaken she had been by the incident. "She was always concerned about security." "Smart woman," Kate commented. As evening fell, I found myself in Eleanor's study, the room where she had first explained the trust to me, where she had later added the infidelity clause, where she had spent countless hours managing the family's affairs. The room was unchanged since her death. Books still lined the shelves, her antique desk remained positioned to catch the morning light, her collection of rare fountain pens still displayed in a glass case. I ran my fingers along the spines of leather-bound accounting ledgers she had insisted on maintaining alongside digital records. Trust technology if you must, she'd once told me, but always keep a backup you can hold in your hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Camille. Met with my FBI contact. Situation more serious than we thought. Delaney under active investigation for connections to organized crime. Call me ASAP. Organized crime. The words seemed absurd, disconnected. From the life I'd been living, charity galas and board meetings, investment portfolios and trust distributions. Yet somehow Jack had entangled himself, and by extension me, with people who operated in a world I barely comprehended. I sank into Eleanor's chair, overwhelmed by the rapid escalation of events. In just 24 hours, I had gone from a wife confronting her husband's infidelity to a woman in hiding from potential threats connected to money laundering and organized crime. The door opened softly, and Roy entered with a tablet in hand. "We've identified Jasper Reynolds' associates," he said without preamble. "You were right to be concerned. These aren't amateur operators." He passed me the tablet. "And we've confirmed that Jack is currently at this location." The screen displayed a map with a pulsing dot at an address I recognized immediately. Kendra's apartment building. "He's been there for the past 2 hours," Roy continued. "Based on his phone activity, he's making numerous calls, some to Jasper, others to numbers associated with Delaney's organization." I nodded, unsurprised that Jack had run to Kendra in his moment of crisis. What did surprise me was how little the knowledge hurt. Just days ago, confirmation of his affair had been devastating. Now, it seemed almost irrelevant compared to the larger dangers we were facing. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked. "At the Archer Building?" Roy's expression was grim. "Based on our intelligence, Jack is being called to account by his lenders. They'll want explanations, and more importantly, solutions. If he doesn't have them, he let the implication hang in the air. And if I reinstate the trust distributions? If I release the funds? That would solve Jack's immediate problem," Roy acknowledged. "But it would also potentially implicate you in whatever financial schemes they're running." I thought about Eleanor's letter, her belief in my ability to protect the legacy she had built, about the responsibility that came with the power she had entrusted to me. "Then we need a different approach," I said, straightening in Eleanor's chair, drawing strength from the memory of her unflinching resolve. One that protects the Blackwood legacy without capitulating to threats. For the first time, Roy smiled slightly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Morning light filtered through the leaded glass windows of the Blackwood estate as I descended the grand staircase, following the aroma of fresh coffee. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. In the kitchen, modernized. By Eleanor 5 years ago, but still retaining its traditional warmth, Kate was already up, monitoring security feeds on a tablet while sipping coffee. "Good morning," she said, sliding a mug across the marble island toward me. "Roy's on his way with updates. Davis tracked Jack all night. He stayed at Kendra's until about 3 a.m., then went to Jasper's condo downtown. He's still there." I nodded, grateful for the information, but unsettled by the surveillance we now needed to maintain on my husband. Just a week ago, my concerns had been centered on his late nights and suspicious receipts. Now we were tracking his movements like he was a criminal suspect. Perhaps he was. Roy arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by Camille. Both looked grim. "We have complications," Roy said without preamble. Camille's FBI contact provided some disturbing information. Camille opened her laptop, typing rapidly. "The FBI has been investigating Delaney's organization for over a year. They believe he's been laundering money for the Vasquez Syndicate, an operation with ties to international drug trafficking." My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "And Jack's been, what? Helping them?" Unknowingly, we think, Camille said. According to my contact, they use people like Jack, wealthy, connected, with access to substantial legitimate capital, as washers. These people invest in Delaney's development projects, which appear legitimate on paper but are primarily vehicles for cleaning illicit funds. The regular payments Jack's been making, I realized, they're part of this washing process. Camille nodded. The $50,000 monthly transfers are consistent with their pattern. Small enough to avoid automatic regulatory flags, large enough to be worth their while over time. That's not the immediate problem, Roy interjected. The issue is that Jack borrowed $4 million from these people against the trust distribution. Now that the distribution isn't happening, they want their money back, and they believe you're the obstacle. A chill ran through me. They're targeting me? They're exploring options, Roy said carefully. Our surveillance picked up a conversation between Jasper and an associate last night. They discussed the possibility that pressure on you might resolve the situation more quickly than pressure on Jack. What kind of pressure? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Roy and Camille exchanged glances. Nothing specific was mentioned, he said finally. But these organizations typically escalate through predictable phases: intimidation, property damage, and then more direct threats. I set down my coffee cup, noticing a slight tremor in my hand. So I'm what? A hostage to Jack's debts now? Only if we allow it, Roy said firmly. We have several advantages they don't know about. First, they're unaware that we're monitoring them. Second, Camille's FBI contact is willing to share information with us, given the potential threat. And third, Camille added, they don't know about Eleanor's separate trust for you. That gives us financial resources they can't track or access. I thought of the safe deposit box key in my purse, still unused. I need to go to the bank today. Roy shook his head. Too risky. They may be watching financial institutions connected to the Blackwood family. Then send someone else, I suggested. Someone they wouldn't recognize or connect to me. After some discussion, we settled on using one of Roy's associates, a woman who bore a passing resemblance to me but had no connection to the Blackwoods. She would use my ID and authorization letter to access the safe deposit box, with Kate accompanying her as security. As they left for the bank, Roy received an alert on his phone. Jack's on the move, heading to the Modern House. Our primary residence, the glass and steel showplace Jack had insisted on buying. Why would he go there? He knows I'm not there. Gathering items, perhaps. Or looking for clues to your whereabouts. Roy tapped his tablet, bringing up a security feed. We still have cameras active in the house. We can monitor his movements, on C. Screen, Jack entered the foyer, moving with uncharacteristic urgency. He looked different, disheveled, tense, his usual polished appearance noticeably absent. He went directly to my home office, rifling through drawers and folders with increasing frustration. He's looking for the trust documents, I realized. He thinks if he can find the original paperwork, he might find a loophole. There are no loopholes, Camille confirmed. Allison made sure of that. We watched as Jack moved from my office to our bedroom, searching through my closet and dresser. Drawers. The casual violation of my privacy should have angered me, but instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a stranger invade a home that had never truly been mine. When Jack reached the safe in our bedroom closet, I tensed. He knew the combination, our wedding date, just like the one in Eleanor's study. Inside were my grandmother's jewelry and some personal documents. Nothing financially significant, but items of sentimental value. Jack opened the safe and removed everything, dumping the contents into a duffel bag without care or sorting. Then he moved to the bedside table on my side, pulling out the drawer completely and emptying it as well. He's not just looking for documents, Roy observed. He's taking anything of value that might be converted to cash quickly. On screen, Jack's phone rang. He answered, his posture stiffening as he listened. The call lasted less than a minute, but when it ended, Jack's expression had shifted from desperate to truly frightened. "They're calling him to the Archer Building meeting early," Roy guessed, checking his watch. "It's only 10 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for noon." Jack left the house with the duffel bag, driving away with notable speed. Roy was already calling his surveillance team to adjust their positions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Blackwood, we need to discuss your husband's financial obligations. Noon today. The Blackwood estate. Come alone or consequences will be severe." I showed the message to Roy and Camille, watching their expressions darken. "They know where you are," Roy said quietly. "And they're coming here." "We need to move you immediately," Roy said, already calling his team. "The estate isn't secure if they know you're here." I stared at the text message demanding a meeting. "At the Blackwood estate. How did they get my number? And how did they know I'm here? Jack doesn't know." "Someone with access to your information is feeding them details," Camille concluded. "Someone you trust." I mentally reviewed the short list of people who knew my whereabouts. Roy, Camille, Allison, Edward, Kate, and Davis. All professionals with stellar reputations. Roy connected my phone to his laptop. "I'm scanning for tracking software." Minutes later, he announced, "Found something. High-grade spyware, typically used by government agencies or sophisticated private operators." Who installed it, and when? I wondered aloud. Looking back over recent events, I remembered. 2 weeks ago, I took my phone for a software update. Jack suggested it, saying he'd had his done the day before. "He's been monitoring you for weeks," Roy confirmed grimly. "Every call, every text, possibly your location." "But I didn't know I'd be at the estate until yesterday," I insisted. Roy and Camille exchanged looks. "There's only one explanation," Jack told them. "He's working with them more closely than we thought." This revelation shook me. Despite his betrayals, I'd never considered Jack capable of endangering me physically. "I need to see what's in Eleanor's safe deposit box," I said. "It might give us options we don't have now." As Roy arranged our relocation, my phone rang. Allison. "Ava, are you secure?" Her voice was tense. "I've received a visit from Jack and 2 men I didn't recognize. They were looking for trust documentation." "Did they threaten you?" "Not explicitly, but the implication was clear." She paused. "One mentioned they had eyes and ears everywhere. They knew details about our meeting that only someone in my office would know." "Your office is compromised," I realized. "I'm leaving the city for a few days," she said, giving me a secure number before ending the call. As we prepared to leave, I took a final look at Eleanor's portrait hanging in the hallway. She had foreseen this crisis, placing safeguards in my hands that even Jack didn't know existed. Outside, Kate arrived with the leather document case from the safe deposit box. Mission accomplished. No one followed us. As we drove away from the estate, I held the case on my lap, knowing it contained Eleanor's final gift: knowledge, power, and perhaps a way forward none of us could yet see. Whatever Jack had involved himself in, whatever threats surrounded us, I would not let Eleanor's legacy fall into the hands of people who saw it merely as a source of cash. The SUV pulled away, leaving the estate behind as we headed toward unknown territory. The documents in my lap represented Eleanor's final gift: knowledge that might be our only protection against whatever dangers lay ahead. Roy's secure location was a lakeside cabin 30 miles from the city, outwardly a modest vacation property, but inside equipped with off-grid power, satellite communications, reinforced walls, and multiple escape routes. I opened Eleanor's document case, finding folders labeled Ava's Trust, Contingency Plans, Evidence File, J. Reynolds, and Final Measures. Ava's Trust contained exactly what Eleanor had described: Trust documents establishing a separate entity with me as sole beneficiary and trustee. The assets were staggering: $12 million in investments, property holdings in 3 states, and controlling interest in Blackwood Shipping Company. Eleanor moved all this without Jack knowing? Camille asked incredulously. The evidence file contained a comprehensive dossier on Jasper: financial records, background checks, surveillance, photos and documentation of his connections to Marcus Delaney dating back over a decade. Eleanor was investigating Jasper, I realized. She knew he was involved with questionable people. Not just knew, Roy said, examining surveillance photographs. She was building a case against him. The final measures folder contained a letter addressed to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, detailing Jasper's activities and his connection to Jack. It was unsigned, with a note in Eleanor's handwriting: to be sent only in dire circumstances. She created a nuclear option, Roy observed. Complete exposure of the operation. But she never sent it, I noted. Even knowing what Jasper was involved in, she protected Jack. My burner phone rang. Jack's voice came through, tense and hushed. "Ava, where are you? They're looking for you." "I'm safe," I replied as Roy signaled for me to keep him talking. "Which is more than I can say for you." "These people, they're not who I thought. You need to reinstate the trust distribution immediately." "So you can pay off your illegal loans?" "The ones secured using assets you don't control?" Jack admitted sending the message about meeting at the estate. "Not a trap. A meeting. I needed to talk to you without them listening in." When I confronted him about monitoring my phone, his confusion seemed genuine. "I never suggested that. I haven't had my phone serviced in months. If you didn't have my phone bugged, then how did you know I was at the estate?" Allison told me, he said, "when I went to her office this morning." Roy's expression darkened, writing on a notepad. "Allison?" When Jack mentioned something about Eleanor, he'd been trying to tell me, his voice cut off abruptly. A different male voice came on the line. "Mrs. Blackwood, such a pleasure to finally speak with you. Your husband has been telling us so much about you." "Who is this?" I demanded. "A business associate of your husband's. We have unresolved financial matters to discuss." "I think you should discuss those with Jack. Jack's ability to resolve this situation has expired. Now we're looking to you as the controller of the Blackwood Trust. And if I refuse, then our next conversation will be considerably less pleasant." The line went dead. "They have Jack," Roy confirmed. "And they'll use him as leverage." Looking at Eleanor's folders, particularly the final measures document, I made my decision. It's time to activate Eleanor's final measure. But first, we need one more ally. I picked up the burner phone and dialed Kendra. "This is Ava Blackwood. We need to talk about Jack." Kendra agreed to meet us at a coffee shop near Roy's cabin. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. The polished, confident mistress replaced by a frightened woman in jeans and a plain sweater. "This is insane," she said without preamble. "I shouldn't be talking to you." "Yet here you are," Camille observed coolly. "You don't understand what's happening," Kendra insisted. "Then explain it," I said. "Starting with how you got involved with Jack." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I met Jack through Jasper. I worked for one of Jasper's investment firms. Jasper introduced us at a company event last year." "And the affair began immediately?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "It wasn't an affair. Not really." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I was placed. Jasper told me to get close to Jack, to report back on his conversations, finances, relationship with you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow." "You were spying on him?" "At first, then things got complicated. Jack was charming. I started to care about him. That wasn't supposed to happen." "What was supposed to happen?" Camille pressed. I was supposed to help convince Jack to move money through certain channels. The affair was a way to gain influence. The gifts, the apartment, all. Creating leverage. Leverage for what? To make him dependent. Compromised. She twisted a napkin nervously. Jack's valuable because of his family name, his connections, because of the trust. The Blackwood Trust? She nodded. Jasper has been trying to get access to that money for years. He worked for Eleanor briefly. Did you know that? Before she brought in Edward. She fired him when she discovered he was mismanaging funds. This was new information. Eleanor never mentioned that. Because she was embarrassed. Jasper was her mistake. She trusted him because of his connection to Jack. Kendra's expression hardened. Jasper never forgave her for that. So this was all about revenge? Partly revenge, partly business. Jasper promised Delaney he could deliver the Blackwood money. When Eleanor died, they thought Jack would finally control it all. But he didn't, I said quietly. I did. When they realized you were the trustee with full control, they changed strategies. Jack was the pressure point to get to you. And you were the pressure point to get to Jack, Camille concluded. Yes. Kendra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But now everything's falling apart. Jack couldn't deliver the money and Delaney's people are looking for someone to blame. That's why you're here, I realized. You're scared they'll come after you next. She met my gaze directly. They already have. Yesterday, 2 men came to my apartment. They said if Jack doesn't pay his debt by tomorrow, they'll start with me, then move on to anyone else he cares about. Including me, I said. Especially you. She reached into her purse and withdrew a thumb drive. This is why I agreed to meet. Everything I know about Delaney's operation is on here. Names, dates, transactions. Jack doesn't know I have it. I took the drive, our fingers briefly touching. Why are you giving me this? Her expression mixed guilt, fear, and determination. Because I'm not dying for Jasper's revenge fantasy. And because... She hesitated. Because I'm trying to do the right thing for once. Back at the cabin, Roy examined Kendra's thumb drive on an isolated laptop, ensuring it contained no malware before transferring the files to our secure system. The information was extensive. Financial records, emails between Jasper and Delaney, photographs of meetings with various individuals, and most importantly, detailed notes on the structure of Delaney's money laundering operation. This is gold, Camille murmured, scanning through transaction records. With this and Eleanor's evidence, we have enough to take down their entire network. But not enough time to let the legal system work before they come after Jack, I pointed out. According to Kendra, we have until tomorrow. Roy looked up from his tactical maps. Even with this evidence, we can't just hand Jack over to law enforcement. He'd be arrested along with the others. And we still don't know if we can trust Kendra, Kate added. This could be another manipulation. I paced the cabin's main room, thinking through our limited options. We need leverage that works immediately. Something that makes them back off without waiting for arrests or court proceedings. Camille's expression shifted. What about Eleanor's other trust? The one she set up for you? I paused mid-step. What about it? 12 million in assets, control of the shipping company. That's significant leverage. What if we offer a deal? The money they want in exchange for Jack's safety. Absolutely not, Roy interjected. You start paying extortion, it never ends. I'm not suggesting we actually give them the money, Camille clarified. Just that we use it as bait, to get them to a location of our choosing, under circumstances we control. Understanding dawned. A trap. Roy's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. With enough law enforcement waiting, it could work. But we'd need absolute certainty about the meeting location, attendees, timing, everything. And we'd need them to believe I'm actually willing to pay, I added. Delaney's people aren't amateurs. They'll be suspicious of any sudden capitulation. Not if they think they've broken you, Camille suggested. Not if they believe you're acting out of fear. I considered this. How do we convince them of that? Davis, who had been monitoring communications in the corner, suddenly stood. We might have a problem. There's movement at the Blackwood estate. Security. Cameras show 2 vehicles approaching the main entrance. Roy moved to Davis's station, watching the feed from cameras Eleanor had installed years ago. Black SUV, tinted windows, professional. The second vehicle is... That's Jack's car. My heart raced. They're looking for me there. And they brought Jack to help convince you, Roy noted grimly. We watched as 4 men exited the SUV, 2 keeping hold of Jack, who looked disheveled and appeared to be limping. They approached the front door, trying it and finding it locked, then began a methodical search of the first-floor windows. They're going to break in, Kate observed. Let them, I said suddenly, a plan forming in my mind. In fact, let's help them. What are you thinking? Roy asked, recognizing my expression. They want to scare me into paying. Let's let them think they're succeeding. I turned to Camille. Can you remotely access the estate's security system? Deactivate it as if I'd done it in a panic while fleeing? Camille nodded slowly. Easily. And Roy, you have contacts in law enforcement who could respond to a break-in at the estate. Not immediately, but quickly enough to make them flee before doing any serious damage. I can arrange that, he confirmed. But what's the end game? Here? I picked up Eleanor's letter regarding my separate trust. They want leverage over me. I'm going to give them something they think is leverage. Access to information about Eleanor's private trust. Information they'll believe gives them a path to the money. A false trail, Camille said with dawning appreciation. One that leads exactly where we want them to go. I turned to the map Roy had been studying earlier. We need a location we control, where law enforcement can stage without being seen, where we can dictate all the terms. Roy considered, then pointed to a spot on the map. The old Blackwood shipping warehouse by the river, owned by the company. Eleanor left to you, officially abandoned but still structurally sound. Multiple access points, good sightlines, completely controlled space. Perfect. I looked at the team surrounding me, skilled professionals who had become unexpected allies in this bizarre chapter of my life. Let's be clear about our objectives. Priority 1 is Jack's safety. Priority 2 is gathering enough evidence to ensure Delaney, Jasper, and their organization face justice. Roy nodded approvingly. And priority 3? I thought of Eleanor's meticulous planning, her foresight in protecting the legacy that Jack had so carelessly endangered. Priority 3 is ensuring the Blackwood name survives this intact, I said firmly. Not for Jack's sake, but for Eleanor's. For what she built and protected all these years. With our strategy outlined, we divided tasks. Camille would manipulate the estate's security systems, making it appear I had fled in haste. Roy would contact his law enforcement connections, setting up surveillance at both the estate and the warehouse. Kate and Davis would prepare the warehouse for our controlled confrontation, and I would prepare the bait, documentation about Eleanor's private trust that appeared legitimate but contained subtle misinformation, leading Delaney and Jasper to believe they had finally found their path to the Blackwood fortune. As I worked, I thought about Jack, his betrayal, his poor decisions, his weakness in the face of Jasper's manipulation. Despite everything, he was still my husband, still the man I had once loved enough to marry. I couldn't abandon him to Delaney's people, regardless of how thoroughly he had abandoned our vows. Eleanor wouldn't have wanted that. She had protected Jack from his worst impulses for decades, even while preparing for the possibility that those protections might eventually fail. Now that responsibility had passed to me. The trap was set. Now we waited for Delaney and Jasper to take the bait. Through the warehouse security feed, I watched Jasper stride confidently across the abandoned loading bay, flanked by 2 men whose Posture and vigilant eyes marked them as security rather than business associates. Behind them, Marcus Delaney, a man I'd only seen in photographs until now, moved with the casual authority of someone accustomed to power. Beside him walked Jack, no longer physically restrained but clearly under duress, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. "They brought 4 visible security," Roy murmured into his communication device, relaying information to the FBI team positioned outside. Plus, Delaney, Jasper, and Jack, approaching the main office area now. I checked my appearance one last time in the small mirror we'd set up in the makeshift command center. I had deliberately chosen clothing that projected vulnerability. A simple sweater rather than my usual tailored blazer, minimal makeup, hair pulled back hastily. I needed to appear frightened but resolute, a woman backed into a corner but determined to protect her husband. "Remember?" Roy said, adjusting my concealed microphone. "Stick to the script. The more authentic your fear appears, the more likely they are to believe you've capitulated." I nodded, swallowing hard. The fear, at least, wouldn't require much acting. "FBI teams are in position," Kate confirmed, monitoring communications from law enforcement. "They'll move on your signal word." "And the evidence?" I asked Camille. She patted her laptop. "Capturing everything, audio, video, and all electronic communications. Between this and Kendra's data, they won't see daylight for decades." I took a deep breath and moved toward the door that would lead me into the warehouse's former executive office, where our unwitting targets awaited. Roy would remain hidden in the adjacent room, monitoring through surveillance while the FBI maintained their positions outside. As I entered, all eyes turned to me. Jack's widened in surprise. He clearly hadn't expected me to actually appear. "Mrs. Blackwood," Delaney said smoothly, his accent more pronounced in person. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I trust you've come prepared to resolve our financial situation." I allowed my gaze to linger on Jack, noting the bruise forming under his left eye and his slightly hunched posture suggesting possible rib injuries. The sight strengthened my resolve. "I have the documentation you're looking for," I said, my voice deliberately unsteady. "Information about Eleanor's private trust, the one neither Jack nor I knew about until recently." Jasper's expression sharpened. "What private trust?" I placed a folder on the dusty desk between us. $12 million in assets, completely separate from the family trust you've been trying to access. Delaney made no move toward the folder, gesturing for one of his men to retrieve it. Instead, the guard handed it to Jasper, who began scanning the documents with growing excitement. "She's right," he told Delaney. "Eleanor established this 5 years ago, completely off the books. Liquid assets, property holdings, and—" His voice faltered, slightly. "Controlling interest in Blackwood Shipping." Delaney's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication that this information surprised him. "And you have access to these assets?" "I'm the sole beneficiary and trustee," I confirmed. "The funds can be moved within 24 hours. "Why would you tell us this?" Delaney asked, studying me carefully. "Why not keep it hidden?" I looked at Jack again, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice. "Because despite everything, I don't want him hurt. And because I want this to end. All of it." "Very noble," Jasper commented, unable to completely mask his triumph as he continued examining the documents. "But these assets are still under your control. What assurance do we have that you'll actually transfer the funds?" "You have me," I said simply. "I'm here, aren't I? I could have run, disappeared with Eleanor's money. Instead, I'm offering you a solution." Delaney circled the desk slowly, a predator assessing wounded prey. "You're offering to pay your husband's debts from your personal fortune, a touching display of loyalty he seems not to have earned." Jack flinched but remained silent. "I'm offering a clean break," I clarified. $4 million plus interest to clear Jack's debt, in exchange for your guarantee that you'll never contact either of us again." "And why would we agree to that?" Jasper asked. when we could simply take control of the entire trust? I met his gaze steadily. Because Eleanor prepared for that possibility too. There are safeguards, legal tripwires that would freeze everything if I'm coerced, or if I disappear. A tension-filled silence followed as Delaney and Jasper exchanged glances, weighing their options. Finally, Delaney smiled, a cold, calculated expression that never reached his eyes. "I believe we have reached an understanding, Mrs. Blackwood. You will transfer the agreed amount by noon tomorrow. In return, your husband will be released, and our business relationship will conclude." Relief washed over Jack's face. The poor fool actually believed it was that simple. I maintained my vulnerable facade while allowing a hint of resignation to show through. "There's one more thing. I need proof that all records of Jack's involvement with your organization are destroyed. Nothing that could resurface later." "Of course," Delaney agreed smoothly. "We are nothing if not thorough in protecting our associates' privacy." Jasper was still examining the trust documents, greed evident in his expression. "These routing numbers for the transfers, they're current?" "Yes," I confirmed, uttering the signal phrase we had agreed upon. "Everything is current and verified." Through my earpiece, I heard Roy's acknowledgement. The FBI teams were moving into position. "Excellent," Jasper said, slipping the documents into his jacket. "We'll verify these immediately and—" The warehouse. Doors burst open with a thunderous crash. "FBI! Hands where we can see them!" Agents in tactical gear swarmed into the room, weapons raised. The next 60 seconds unfolded in controlled chaos. Delaney's security reached for weapons but froze when they realized they were outnumbered 5-1. Jack dropped to the floor, hands covering his head. Jasper's face contorted in shock, his gaze whipping toward me with sudden comprehension. "You set us up," he hissed. I maintained eye contact as agents moved to secure him. Eleanor taught me well. Delaney, unlike his panicking associates, remained eerily calm. As agents approached, he looked at me with something resembling respect. "A Blackwood after all," he said quietly, before being handcuffed and read his rights. The FBI tactical team worked with practiced efficiency, securing the suspects and the evidence. I stepped back, allowing Roy to emerge from the adjacent room and coordinate with the lead agent. Jack remained on the floor, seemingly unable to process what was happening until an agent helped him to his feet. His eyes found mine across the chaos. "Ava!" His voice was barely audible. "What have you done?" "What Eleanor would have done," I replied simply. "Protected the family legacy." As Jack was led away for medical attention and questioning, Camille approached with her laptop. "We got everything. Their explicit threats, Jasper's admission of connections to Delaney, their knowledge of Jack's loans, all of it recorded and transmitted to the FBI's secure server. And Kendra's information? Already being used to identify other members of Delaney's network. The FBI is executing simultaneous raids across the city." The lead agent, a stern-faced woman named Special Agent Winters, joined us. "Mrs. Blackwood, your cooperation has been invaluable. We've been building a case against Delaney for over a year, but couldn't get close enough to gather actionable evidence. What happens now?" I asked. "Delaney, Jasper, and their associates will be processed and charged with multiple federal crimes. Money, laundering, extortion, conspiracy, possibly racketeering. The evidence is overwhelming." "And Jack?" Agent Winters' expression softened slightly. "That's more complicated. Your husband was involved in illegal activities, but we recognize his position as both participant and victim. His cooperation will be crucial in determining charges." I nodded, having anticipated this. "I'd like to speak with him." They had set up a temporary medical station in another part of the warehouse. Jack sat on a folding chair while a paramedic examined his ribs. When he saw me approach, he dismissed the medic with a gesture. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. The man before me seemed smaller somehow, his usual confidence completely stripped away. Why? He finally asked. You could have just let them take me. After everything I did, Eleanor wouldn't have wanted that, I interrupted. Despite everything, she still considered you family. She protected you until her last breath, even knowing your weaknesses. Jack's eyes filled with tears, something I'd never seen in 15 years of marriage. I didn't know about the money. Laundering. I thought it was just investments. But you suspected, I countered gently. And you chose not to question it because the returns were good, because it impressed Kendra. He flinched at her name. Was she part of this too? The setup? She made her choice, just as you made yours. I sat in the chair across from him. Jack, the FBI will want your full cooperation. Everything you know about Delaney's operation, Jasper's involvement, all of it. And if I cooperate, what then? Prison? That depends on what you tell them. But either way, our marriage is over. Something like acceptance settled in his expression. I know. He hesitated. The trust distribution will remain suspended, I confirmed. Eleanor's provisions were clear, but you won't be destitute. There are other arrangements that can be made, assuming you cooperate fully. Agent Winters approached, signaling that our time was up. As I rose to leave, Jack caught my wrist gently. Ava. Before they took me to the Archer building, I tried to tell you something about Eleanor. His voice dropped. She knew this day would come. She told me, right before she died, that she'd put safeguards in place. Not just for the money, but for you. She said you were the daughter she never had, the one worthy of the Blackwood name. A tightness formed in my throat. She never told me that. She didn't need to, Jack said softly. She showed you, with every decision she made. Agent Winters cleared her throat, and I stepped back, allowing 2 agents to escort Jack to a waiting vehicle. As I watched him go, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I had done what Eleanor had trusted me to do. Roy appeared at my side. Ready to go? I nodded, taking one last look at the warehouse where everything had changed. Yes, we have a legacy to protect. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse, listening as the judge delivered sentences in United States v. Delaney et al. The trial had dominated financial news for weeks, exposing an elaborate money laundering operation that had processed over $200 million through seemingly legitimate real estate investments. Marcus Delaney received 20 years, Jasper as his primary facilitator in the financial sector, 18. Their security personnel and lower-level associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, depending on their involvement and cooperation. Jack wasn't in the courtroom. His case had been handled separately, his full cooperation earning him a plea deal, 3 years in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years probation. A lenient sentence, all things considered, though the Blackwood name would forever carry the association with financial crimes. As I gathered my belongings to leave, I noticed a familiar figure waiting in the hallway, Kendra. She looked different now, more subdued in a conservative suit, her once flashy jewelry replaced by simple pearl earrings that reminded me, oddly enough, of Eleanor. Mrs. Blackwood, she said as I approached. Thank you for coming today. It's Montgomery again, actually, I corrected. The divorce had been finalized last month, and I wouldn't have missed it. The FBI offered me witness protection, she said without preamble. New identity, relocation, the works. That seems prudent. Delaney had connections beyond those arrested. She nodded. I leave tomorrow. A slight pause. I wanted to apologize before I go for my role in all of this. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse there. You made the right choice in the end. That counts for something. Maybe. She glanced at the courtroom doors. Have you spoken to Jack recently? Last week. He's adjusting as well as can be expected. An awkward silence fell between us, two women connected by circumstances neither of us could have imagined a year ago. What will you do now? Kendra finally asked. With the company, the estate, everything? It was a question I'd been pondering for months. Eleanor left me more than assets. She left me responsibility. I intend to honor that. As Kendra walked away toward her new life, I felt the weight of that responsibility settle more firmly on my shoulders. The scandal had inevitably affected Blackwood Shipping's reputation, but the company itself remained solid, its legitimate operations untouched by Jack's misdeeds. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, hoping for comments from key figures in the case. I had declined all interviews until now, focusing instead on stabilizing the company and establishing my leadership. Today, however, I approached the microphones deliberately. Mrs. Blackwood, one began. Ms. Montgomery, I corrected again. Ms. Montgomery, will you be continuing as CEO of Blackwood Shipping despite the company's connection to these crimes? I met the reporter's gaze directly. Blackwood Shipping was a victim in this case, not a perpetrator. The company's involvement was limited to attempts by outside forces to gain control of its assets, attempts that failed due to safeguards put in place by Eleanor Blackwood years ago. Will you be selling your controlling interest now that the case is resolved? No. My response was immediate and firm. Eleanor Blackwood built this company on principles of integrity and service. Those principles haven't changed, regardless of recent events. And your ex-husband's role in the company going forward? Jack Blackwood no longer has any connection to Blackwood Shipping or its subsidiaries, I said, my voice level. The company is moving forward under new leadership, focused on rebuilding trust and expanding the legitimate services that have been our core business for 3 generations. As the questions continued, I felt a strange sense of coming full circle. A year ago, I had been the supportive wife at Jack's side during corporate events, carefully maintaining the image he wanted to project. Now I stood alone, speaking with an authority that came not from my connection to the Blackwood name, but from my own determination to preserve what Eleanor had entrusted to me. Later that afternoon, I drove to the Blackwood estate, my home now, in both legal fact and emotional truth. The grand old house had begun to feel less like a museum and more like a place of possibility. I'd converted Jack's study into a planning center for the charitable foundation I was establishing, using a portion of Eleanor's trust to fund educational opportunities for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. As I walked up the front steps, I thought about identity, how I had once defined myself primarily as Jack's wife, a role that had gradually diminished me. Now, standing on my own, I was more fully myself than I had been in 15 years. Inside, I passed Eleanor's portrait in the main hall, pausing as I often did to study her knowing expression. You were right, I told her quietly. About everything. The portrait didn't answer, of course, but somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 5 times, marking the hour and reminding me that time moved forward, carrying all of us with it, toward consequences, toward resolutions, and sometimes toward second chances. 1 year to the day after Jack's sentencing, I stood at the helm of the completely revitalized Blackwood Shipping Company. The boardroom, once dominated by Jack's college friends and business associates, now featured a diverse group of industry experts I had carefully selected, people valued for their integrity as much as their business acumen. Today's meeting marked a milestone, our first full year of operations under my leadership, with record profits despite the initial reputational damage from the scandal. As I presented the annual figures, I couldn't help but think how different this room felt from the intimidating space I had first entered as Jack's wife 15 years ago. The expansion into sustainable shipping technologies has exceeded our projections, I concluded, directing attention to the final slide of my presentation. Our carbon footprint has decreased by 32%, while efficiency has increased by 21%. The Blackwood Innovation Grant has funded 3 promising startups in the maritime sector, all of which align with our new corporate values. Edward, who had remained with the company through the transition, nodded approvingly. Eleanor would be proud, he said quietly as the meeting adjourned. You've accomplished more in 12 months than Jack did in 15 years. Different priorities, I replied, gathering my materials. Jack saw the company as a source of personal wealth. I see it as Eleanor did, a responsibility to employees, communities, and the industry itself. Outside the boardroom, Allison waited in the reception area. Our relationship had become strictly professional after her complicated role in the events surrounding Jack's downfall came to light. She hadn't been directly involved with Delaney's organization, but she had turned a blind eye to Jasper's influence for years, allowing him access to information he should never have had. The trust restructuring documents are ready for your signature, she said, maintaining the formal tone she now always used with me. Once filed, the separation between the family trust and the corporate entities will be complete. I nodded, taking the folder she offered. And the foundation paperwork? Also included. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation will be officially established once you sign. The foundation had been my passion project over the past year. A way to channel some of the Blackwood wealth toward meaningful change. Focusing on educational access for first-generation college students, the foundation embodied Eleanor's belief that true wealth lay in creating opportunity for others. After signing the documents, I drove to the federal correctional facility where Jack was serving his sentence. We had maintained minimal contact since the divorce, quarterly updates on the company as required by our settlement agreement, occasional brief conversations about the disposition of personal property. Today's visit was different. The anniversary seemed to demand a certain closure, a final acknowledgement of all that had happened and all that had changed. Jack looked healthier than I expected, the entitled softness replaced by a leaner physique. Prison had not been easy on him, but neither had it broken him. You look well, he said as we sat across from each other in the visiting room. The company must be thriving. It is, I confirmed. We've redirected the focus back to Eleanor's vision. A small smile touched his lips. And the trust? Restructured. Your distributions will resume once you're released, but at a reduced level, as we discussed. He nodded, accepting this without complaint, a marked change from the Jack I had known. And the estate? Still standing, still mine. I met his gaze steadily. I've established a foundation in Eleanor's name. The East Wing has been converted into its headquarters. Something like genuine approval crossed his face. She would have liked that. She always said the house was too big for just a family. A silence fell between us, not uncomfortable but weighted with all that remained unsaid. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice softer. I've had a lot of time to think in here, Ava, about what Eleanor tried to teach me, what you tried to show me. He looked down at his hands. I didn't appreciate either of you until it was too late. It's never too late to understand a lesson, I replied, even if you can't change the past. As our visit concluded, Jack asked one final question. Are you happy, Ava, after everything? The question caught me off guard with its simplicity and unexpected sincerity. I considered it carefully before answering. I'm fulfilled, I said finally. I'm doing work that matters, preserving something valuable, building something new. That's more important than happiness. Jack nodded slowly. That sounds like something Eleanor would say. Yes, I agreed, rising to leave. I suppose it does. As I walked to my car, I realized Jack was right. Somewhere along this tumultuous journey, I had absorbed not just Eleanor's business acumen, but her philosophy, her belief that purpose outweighed personal satisfaction, that stewardship mattered more than ownership, that true legacy was measured, in impact rather than dollars. Eleanor had known all along what Jack never understood, that the Blackwood fortune wasn't meant to serve the family, but rather, the family was meant to serve as caretakers of resources that could, when properly directed, create ripples of positive change extending far beyond our own lives. That understanding was Eleanor's true gift to me, more valuable than any trust fund, more lasting than any estate. 3 years later, I stood on the grand staircase of the Blackwood estate, watching as guests arrived for the Foundation's annual scholarship gala. The home that had once felt like a museum now hummed with purpose, its historic rooms hosting educational programs, community events, and tonight, a celebration of the 100 students currently pursuing higher education through Eleanor Blackwood. Foundation scholarships. Jack had been released from prison 6 months ago. True to his word, he had maintained a low profile, settling in a small coastal town 3 states away. He hadn't attended tonight's event, though I'd sent an invitation, a courtesy acknowledging his connection to the legacy, however complicated. Ms. Montgomery, the first students are arriving, my assistant informed me, breaking my reverie. I nodded, moving toward the entrance to greet them. These young people, bright, determined first-generation college students from backgrounds similar to my own, represented Eleanor's vision brought to life. Each had overcome significant obstacles to pursue education. Each carried potential that might otherwise have gone unrealized without the Foundation's support. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing before Eleanor's portrait during a quiet moment. The painting had been moved from the hallway to a place of honor in the main reception room, overseeing the transformation of her home into something with far greater impact than a family residence. Ms. Montgomery? A young woman approached, one of our first scholarship recipients, now in her final year of medical school. I just wanted to thank you again. None of this would have been possible without the Foundation. Eleanor Blackwood. Made it possible, I corrected gently. I'm just continuing what she started. After the girl moved away, I studied Eleanor's painted expression once more. In the early days after the scandal broke, many had urged me to distance myself from the Blackwood name entirely. Start fresh, they advised. Use your maiden name, sell the company, leave the past behind. But that would have been a betrayal of what Eleanor had entrusted to me. Not just assets to protect, but a vision to fulfill, a legacy to transform. The Blackwood name now stood for something beyond wealth and privilege. It represented opportunity, education, and second chances. In the moment Jack had spent our savings on his girlfriend, he had forgotten who controlled his trust fund. But that momentary financial betrayal had led to something neither of us could have imagined, a complete reinvention of what the Blackwood legacy meant. I moved back toward the gathering, where students and donors mingled, where possibility filled the air. My journey from Jack's wife to independent steward of Eleanor's vision hadn't been easy, but its difficulty made the transformation all the more meaningful. The trust fund Jack had taken for granted had never been about money at all. The true trust, the one Eleanor had recognized in me from our first meeting, was the faith she'd placed in my ability to see beyond self-interest to something larger. I can't believe you emptied our joint account to buy her that Audi, I had said to Jack that fateful night, not knowing how completely that moment would change everything. Sometimes betrayal becomes a doorway. Sometimes an ending creates space for a more meaningful beginning. And sometimes, if you're fortunate, you discover that what you thought was taken from you was never what mattered most to begin with. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.